Hello, and welcome to Detective and Mystery Fiction. If you're enjoying this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. If you'd like to support our effort to revive classic pulp detective magazines, you can join our channel membership or pick up this story as an ebook from our channel store and read along. Your support helps keep these timeless tales alive. The Claw of Iblis by E. Hoffmann Price. Clues Detective, July 1935. Two men sat face to face in a second-floor room of a house in the native quarter of Singapore, not far from the mosque, at the end of Jalan Penang. The European clothing they wore was outlandish in the sultry red glow that brought smouldering highlights out of the Bocaro rugs and the brazen censers and burnished copper coffee service that gleamed from wall niches. But Pawang Ali, the scourge of native criminals, was at home in the ruddy half-gloom that whispered of the lurid secrets of Asia. His handsome, aquiline face was placid, and his faintly slanted eyes were dark pools, shadowed by brows that rose in querying arches as he said, "It is some time since the Inspector Sahib has honored me. I regret that my esteemed friend is troubled." Inspector Arnold Kemp's blue eyes widened. His leathery, sun-tanned face was habitually as somber as the droop of his straw-colored mustache. He wondered how his poker mask had betrayed his emotions. "Wait a minute, Pawang Ali," he laughed. "Do I look that worried?" "Not your looks, but your actions," the Arab explained. "The Inspector Sahib came unobtrusively in a rickshaw instead of in an official car. Usually you telephone. This time you did not wish anyone to know of your visit." And finally, the shred of a severely mangled cigar adheres to your lip. The inspector grimaced wryly, removed the betraying bit of tobacco, and rumbled, "Damn it! Yes, it's the claw of Iblis. Piracy, smuggling, and a chain of murders reaching from here to Siam." The evil voice of hidden Asia was mocking Arnold Kemp's slayings under his very nose, and followed by taunting messages. Somewhere in Singapore was a hidden menace that whispered in the darkness. Assassinations in Terengganu, Pahang, and Malacca were the echoes of that sinister murmuring. It was high time for Pawang Ali to close the case with his soft-voiced, inevitable report, "Killed while resisting arrest." "The Claw of Iblis," admitted the Pawang, "is an exceedingly clever person. But if I can assist with a suggestion," his quiet, almost melancholy voice trailed to an indefinite interrogation. Kemp's eyes blazed wrathfully, and his heavy fist pounded the solid teak desk. "Suggestion, my eye," he exploded. "I want you to go out and, arrest him." The Arab's smile was in his eyes rather than on his lips, but for an instant his quartering of Malay blood made his nostrils flare as at the scent of blood. Then he shrugged and said, "The wolf is more cunning than the hound, but he may finally turn to fight, and as you suggested, Sahib Inspector, it would be lawful to kill him in self-defense." The Pawang, indolent as a sleepy tiger, began fingering the beads of the Muslim rosary that lay on his desk. Kemp's eyes shifted from astrological charts, barely visible in the smoldering gloom, toward the huge crystal globe that glowed like a monstrous moonstone in a wall niche. There was no hope of prodding that imperturbable Arab into action, or probing the brazen mask that concealed his thoughts. "Any time at all, Pawang Ali," was his ironic comment as he reached for his hat. "Haste is of Satan," deplored the Pawang, gesturing to detain his guest. "Be pleased to allow my slow wits sufficient time to consider the—" The jangle of the telephone interrupted his apology. As he reached for the instrument, he remarked casually, "A message over this unlisted wire is usually interesting." Kemp settled back in his chair. Odd news in strange dialects often made that secret line vibrate. The Pawang waited only for a few words, then handed the instrument to the inspector. But he listened and heard the speaker's voice filtering past Kemp's ear. "There will be news for you in 5 minutes, Mr. Inspector. Tune in on your friend's radio set, 6 meters." Then a click, and the line was dead. Kemp slammed the instrument back to its cradle. Pawang. Ali stepped to the all-wave set that stood in a corner and spun the dials. "Damn funny," muttered Kemp. "Funnier than you realize," said the Pawang. His voice was smooth, but his dark eyes were aflame with wrath. "Someone not only knows that you are calling on me, but he has used a private number which no one but you and my own assistants should know." "I've used it only once," protested the inspector. "A few weeks ago, and no one could have overheard me. I was alone in my office." "Wisdom is with Allah," remarked the Arab, hinting that the inspector could not be too certain. Kemp swore and glanced at his watch. At the expiration of the 5th minute, there was a crackle and sputter and a shrill whine. Then an arrogant voice from the short-wave set mocks them. "Inspector Kemp, attention. Go to the Borneo wharf and see what the claw of Iblis has left for you near Showdown. Number 4, hurry, Inspector. You may find a clue or make an arrest if you lose no time." The speech was in English. The Arab's eyes narrowed as he tried to identify the perceptible trace of accent. Then he observed, "No fish is caught until he opens his mouth. I am surprised that our enemy does not know this. He pronounces the name of Satan the Stoned as one of my countrymen would." He pressed a button, beckoned to the inspector, and stepped toward a staircase concealed by ornately embroidered tapestries. The descent took a moment at the most, yet when they reached the street level, Kemp saw a long, black car emerging from an archway not far from the door which had admitted him. "Stay here, HOFFMANN," said Pawang Ali to the chauffeur who had piloted the car from the garage. "Singapore goes to bed early. By 10 in the evening, the city is in a stupor, from which it does not arouse until grey dawn." There was no traffic to block the car that shot out of a narrow alley, thundered across the river, and flashed out South Bridge Road. "Wait a minute," protested the inspector as the car swung to the right at the Krita Air police station instead of continuing straight ahead. "You are going out of your way." Pawang Ali fed the roaring monster more gas and whipped it around the curves of the Kampong Baru Road. It was not until he approached the railway tracks that he throttled down to an easy pace and turned left. The inspector was perplexed at haste neutralized by needless detour. He wondered at the Pawang's cryptic smile. As they approached the Borneo wharf, a tall, turbaned Sikh policeman loomed up in the center of the dusty red highway, full in the glare of the street light near the corner of Showdown number 4. The bearded giant's upraised hand signaled them to halt. At his feet and somewhat to the left of the road lay the body of a man. Pawang Ali stepped on the brake. The Sikh, recognizing Kemp, took the whistle from his lips and saluted. "There was no outcry, Inspector Sahib," he began, gesturing toward the corpse that lay sprawled in the dust. "I found him, as you see, with his head as though it dangled from a rag and not a neck." By the blistering glare of the headlights, Pawang Ali saw the thin, pale, scholarly face of a middle-aged man staring sightlessly at the stars. The mouth seemed to be voicing a protest that had suddenly been cut short. Amazement and indignation had been the last emotions of the man in grey. It was hideous that a man could be facing skyward when he lay on his side. "Broken neck, by heaven," the inspector wrathfully growled. "Fagee." It was the work of an East Indian assassin. He stalks the victim from the rear, whips about his throat a scarf, one end of which is weighted with a few coins or other small compact objects. As the heavy end whisks back over the victim's shoulder, the slayer's left hand catches it, and simultaneously he applies all his weight to the end grasped by his right hand. The result is a broken neck. The British had exterminated Thagi, but the claw of Iblis had not yet been notified. Pawang Ali's faintly slanting, steel-hard eyes had a feral glitter as he advanced toward the corpse. "Look at this man's hand," he said, kneeling beside the body. Kemp looked first at the lean, clutching hand of the dead man, then at the quizzical, brazen mask of his ally. "Well, he still clutches a scrap of paper." Then, as the Pawang plucked the fragment from the clenched fingers, he added, "A blueprint." Kemp regarded the piece that had evidently been torn from a sheet which had been snatched from the grasp of the dead man. He saw, in English lettering, Tayan Besar. The Malay words meant, "Great Lord." "His body is almost cold," observed Pawang Ali, still squatting on his heels. "He was carried here. Footprints are lacking. The earth was disturbed by the impact of the body. See also how a car swerved so that he could be tossed not far from the center of the road." "But why was he killed?" demanded Kemp. "Why?" He was interrupted by the whine of a distant motor. "A car from the detective station, Sahib Inspector," said the policeman. "I turned in the alarm according to instructions." The headlights of the approaching machine speared the darkness of the railroad yards at the left. It was heading for the turn not far ahead, but before Kemp could comment, the Pawang was dashing up the road. The headlights blazed from around the curve. He halted, drew a pistol. A crashing blast, a headlight winked out. Brakes screamed as an answering jet of flame spurted from the approaching car. Pawang Ali dropped to the roadside. A second shot from his gun blotted out the surviving headlight. Inspector Kemp raced after him, weapon drawn. The Sikh kept his post, as prescribed by the regulations. A khaki-clad figure emerged from the car. "Hold it!" shouted Kemp, lowering his pistol as he recognized Assistant Inspector Bradley. "What's all this blasted idiocy? Stop that shooting." There was a low, mirthless laugh from the roadside, and Pawang Ali bobbed up from the blackness of the ditch. "I had to stop the Assistant Inspector," he apologized. "No time to explain, but allow me to demonstrate." The Assistant Inspector eyed his superior. Kemp nodded. Pawang Ali took the chauffeur's place at the wheel. He headed the car down the center of the road, stepped to the running board. Jerking the throttle lever down, he leaped clear. The abandoned machine roared down the highway toward the godown and the corpse. Of all the double-damned idiotic. But the inspector's outburst was cut short. Before the car was halfway to the sick policeman, there was a concussion that hammered them breathless. The speeding machine was flung into the air. A sheet of flame billowed from the red earth. Then a dense cloud of black, oily smoke obscured the demolition of the ton of onrushing metal. Shattered glass and steel fragments rained down about their ears and into the crater in which the warped and twisted wreck had settled. A bomb planted in the center of the road had been touched off by the passage of the police car. Inspector Kemp perplexedly regarded his ally. "I say," he began when he could find words. "Most unusual. But whatever made you foresee that? We were notified that a crime of unusual interest would be committed near the Borneo wharf. Obviously, we should hurry out the Tanjong Pagar road. Instead, I detoured, which was not what the enemy expected. We noted that the body had been hauled to this spot, an odd feature. And by the horizontal beams of my headlights, I detected a suspicious unevenness in the road over which we should reasonably have passed. A skillfully concealed furrow. I guessed what might be expected, and only a shot would check the Assistant Inspector Sahib in time." Inspector Kemp stroked his drooping mustache. "Unusual," he muttered. Then he cursed roundly and resumed. "Another murder without a clue? Before we can find the scene of the killing, every trace will have been blotted out. These tire tracks alone are useless." Pawang Ali shook his head. If the Inspector Sahib will let me use my imagination, perhaps I can make this dead man talk. As he spoke, he probed the pockets and extracted a wallet. It contained no currency, but American Express checks amounting to $1,000 were untouched. "This is Clarence Kendall," said Pawang Ali, glancing at the signature. It would seem that he was robbed, yet these checks, with impressive numerals engraved in the corners, would seem like money to an ignorant slayer. He would take them and only later realize their uselessness. The absence of watch and cufflinks contradicts rather than confirms the apparent robbery. One who was keen enough to abandon express checks would not have torn from a dead man's fingers a sheet of engineer's blueprints. This man was killed for the sake of something concerning Tian Basar, the great lord. "Tian Basar," muttered Kemp. "Sounds like a ship. Plans stolen by spies, eh, what?" "Allah is the knower," evaded the Arab. "It is possible that this man has not yet registered with the police, but you will look into that, Sahib, while I make certain observations." "Astrological?" asked the inspector, but there was no indignation in his voice. "Aye, wallah," affirmed Pawang Ali. "But more particularly, I will study his wallet. The stars are against the claw of Iblis. By striking at you, he has betrayed his own fear, and that fear will trap him." "He's got something," muttered the inspector to himself, as he watched the Pawang's soundless fluent stride take him toward his car. But no white man could make sense of it. He shivered and turned to the sick policeman. For all of Pawang Ali's suave, placid manner, he was at times uncannily like one of the tigers that not many years ago had infested Singapore Island. 2. A few minutes later, Pawang Ali pulled up before the blank facade of his house in the native quarter. He pressed a button on the dashboard of the car. The radio-operated door slid open to admit the car. He ascended the narrow staircase to the second-floor study. There he seated himself at his desk, reached for a volume of astrological tables, and ascertained the positions of the planets at the time of the crime. He studied the result. His lean, bronzed features became immobile, as though he were in a trance. He was drawing into himself, retreating into the psychic realm of his personality. Each planet had a significance that was ancient when the bricks of Babylon were fresh from the maker's mold. "Malefic Saturn, the lord of those who work underground, is in the 12th house," he read aloud. "And Mars is in the 8th, presiding over violent death and strife, over the property of a dead man." The enumeration did not give him any clue, but each symbolic statement suggested a chain of human relationships and clashes which could motivate a crime. At last he placed on the table the scrap of blue paper he had removed from the dead man's grasp, then turned his attention to Kendall's wallet. In addition to the express checks, it contained half a dozen business cards scribbled with blurred and illegible penciling. One item, however, was promising: a fresh memorandum slip. Someone had phoned Kendall at his hotel not more than 3 hours previous, requesting him to call on E.V. Foster. A telephone number followed. The claw of Iblis could not foresee that Kendall would pocket this memorandum. Foster, apparently, was the next link, but until the Pawang could question him, he had to consider the possibility that business with some person other than Foster had led Kendall to his death. He jabbed a push-button on his desk. The buzzer note had scarcely subsided when 3 Chinese, wearing shorts and toadstool-shaped hats, filed into the room and lined up before the teakwood desk. Their wrinkled faces were devoid of any trace of expression as they listened to their master's orders. Find out what gari or rickshaw took Clarence Kendall from his hotel. Learn his destination and what stops he made. Without a word, they filed out of the room. Pawang Ali parted a curtain behind his desk and stepped into an inner apartment. When he emerged, he bore little semblance to the well-dressed, aquiline-faced Arab who had left the study. His Malay blood now predominated. He wore a yellow skull cap embroidered with texts from the Quran, an apple-green jacket, purple sarong, and a peacock-blue sash which concealed a dagger, a wavy-bladed kris, and a revolver. He walked with a perceptible limp, and as he emerged from a side door which opened into an alley near the waterfront, he spat a red jet of sri juice that every well-ordered Malay chews during every waking moment. A rickshaw, drawn by one of his own men, awaited him. He doubled back, then headed west toward the residence section near Tanglan Road. Pawang, Ali's occult methods, camouflaged the spies who lounged about the dives of the native quarter and prowled in the outlying kampongs and along the waterfront. Like their master, their methods were far from orthodox. Astrological observations, however, distracted Arnold Kemp's attention from their existence, which was just as well for the inspector's peace of mind. As he passed the Tank Road station, Pawang Ali saw a rickshaw emerge from a side street. The coolie who drew the vehicle was one of his own men, and so likewise was the passenger, a grim-faced Malay. The two rickshaws remained abreast, only long enough for a low-voiced exchange of words. Tian? There is a man who has just come from Pahang. A large man with a wrathful face and very broad shoulders, and a voice like thunder. He hailed a gari and demanded to be taken to the house of a certain Tian Foster at once. He had a small suitcase which he refused to entrust to the driver. "Thou great blockhead," reprimanded the Pahang. "Why not follow him instead of waiting here to tell me?" "It was not so ordered, Tian," declared the Malay. Hop Wang sent word that we were to find out what rickshaw had carried a certain Kendall from his hotel to the house of E.V. Foster. We mention this other man only because he is on his way at an unseeming hour to call on one of similar name. "Continue with your orders," said Pawang Ali after an instant's thought. "I will myself observe this man from Pahang. He must be an American. Any other white man would go to a hotel and wait to transact his business in the morning. His haste deserves notice. Singapore municipality has a population of over 500,000, but of that number, not many more than 8,000 are white. There should not be a heavy duplication of Foster's a quarter of a mile from his destination." Pang Ali decided to advance on foot. "Mong Duck," he said to the coolie. "Go to the office of the Inspector Sahib and inquire as to white men known to be in Pahang, particularly Americans. The police keep a register of visitors to Singapore, and that city is the only practicable approach to Pahang unless one comes down from Siam." Thus far there was no connection between Kendall and the hasty American, but both were interested in persons named Foster. Just short of Nassim Road, Pawang Ali headed down a narrow drive, at the end of which loomed a bungalow surrounded by a palisade. He blended into the shadows, stealthily approaching the Foster house. A gari was near the entrance. The driver lay sprawled in the shadows cast by the rising moon. He was dead. The stroke of a kris had ripped him open. Torn within the compound came a deep-voiced American oath, a shuffle of feet, and a sharp, popping report. Not a pistol shot, but the impact of a hard fist. It was followed by the crashing of shrubbery and a wrathful babble of Malay. The gate slammed open. A glance sufficed to identify the man from Pahang as he leaped to the driveway. Despite his bulk, he was agile as a panther. He shifted, ducked the flashing sweep of a wavy-bladed kris, and tackled low plunging headlong into the crescent of slayers who had cropped up from the shadows. His lunge carried him through, but the split-second advantage was not enough. He regained his feet. He was gripping a parang which had dropped from the grasp of the enemy he had knocked breathless. He parried a cut that would have shorn his head from his shoulders, The gain was an instant of life, but he was hemmed in with no chance to cut through. He towered head and shoulders above the pack of brown men. His face was craggy, and his eyes were as frosty as the blade with which he lashed out. The assassins who blocked his advance gave way, but before those in the rear could close in, they heard a yell whose savage fury checked them. Pawang Ali, whipping a kris from his sarong, was bounding into action. His swift motion made him a blur of color, framed in a whistling tracery of steel. One of the pack whirled. The silvery tongue of doom licked out, and he dropped in a pool of his own blood, yelling horribly and clutching his stomach. Then, for a few scant seconds, it was a howling vortex of brown bodies and milling blades and flailing limbs. The red earth of Singapore became even redder as Pawang Ali's kris flickered in and out, a shearing serpent of steel. The man from Pahang was desperately chopping and parrying with his blade, but his handling of the weapon was awkward. He was pitted against men who had cut their first teeth on the haft of a kris or campilin. When they saw that the Pawang was alone, the pack divided to keep him at bay until they could overcome the white man. But the Arab bored in, light as a ballet dancer and deadly as a cobra. His audacity caught them flat-footed. Krises clanged and splintered, flying in dazzling arcs from nerveless hands into the moonlight Pawang. Ali felt the bite of frosty steel lick his arms and head and ribs, and then he was in the circle to pluck the man from Pahang out of the clutch of doom. The murderous, flailing kris drank blood at every stroke as he whittled them down. One more rush, but it missed by a hair. A two-handed campilan came darting between him and his goal. The man from Pahang ducked and parried, but he dropped in the midst of that bloodthirsty knot of Malay slayers. The move had been swifter than any eye could follow. Pawang Ali knew that he would have only a dead man to question. His brain exploded in a surge of murderous Malay wrath. The deadly arcs of his red blade made the battle a massacre by moonlight. The assassins broke and fled into the darkness. Pawang Ali was master of the field, but it promised little harvest. He wrathfully kicked aside two who had fallen across the man. From Pahang, the victim was stirring. He had not been beheaded. Near him lay the parang with which he had parried the stroke that would have sliced him in half. Ya Allah, alive! For a moment, the Pawang regarded the massive, clenched fists, the grim red mask, the blood-clotted shock of hair. Then he noted an egg-sized lump just above the ear, and knew why the man from Pahang had not lost the top of his skull. The campillion stroke, sizzling home like a thunderbolt, had driven the flat of his own parrying weapon crashing against his head. Pawang Ali shifted to drag the unconscious man out of the gory tangle that pinned him to the roadway. The man from Pahang muttered and stirred. Then, without an instant's warning, his ponderous fist lashed out, rocking the Pawang like the blow of a pile driver. Though he jerked his head with the punch, he was paralyzed by the impact, and that was but a sample of what was to come. As he staggered back from the revived victim, a kick planted squarely in the pit of his stomach sent him catapulting clear of the battlefield. He was conscious, but utterly helpless. The deep-voiced volcanic oaths the fellow growled as he shook his head identified him beyond all doubt. And before Pawang Ali could reach for his pistol and order him to halt, the man from Pahang was stretching long legs into the shadows. "They three, I might have known better," observed Pawang Ali as he recovered enough to move. "This is a night of treachery." He wiped the blade of his kris and turned toward the entrance of the estate. Light filtered through the foliage that shrouded the rambling bungalow, but all was silent. Just past the gate lay a small leather suitcase, its brass fittings gleaming in the darkness. Blood and fragments of a splintered tooth adhered to the heavy leather. It was impaled by a kriss. The man from Pawang had used it as a buckler. The case rattled as Pawang Ali shook it. He struck the lock a sharp blow with the pommel of his kriss. It snapped open. The paper-wrapped parcel it contained had broken open. Pieces of rock were scattered among the sparse array of underwear and shirts. By the light from the house, the Pawang examined a fragment. It had been chiseled from a ledge of calcareous rock and was unusually heavy for its size. The largest piece was labeled Tiam Besar Goka Air. Kuala Air was a backwoods village in the central gold belt of northern Pawang, where the precious metal was found in volcanic rock and calcareous formations. Tiam Besar must be a mine, fancifully named as anywhere else in the world. He ascended the 10 steps leading to the broad veranda of the bungalow and entered a living room, simply but expensively furnished in the European manner. The man who lay sprawled on the floor was dead. His head was a gory, gruesome pulp. Someone had struck him from the rear with a wrought iron smoking stand that lay a yard from the body. He was lean and grey-haired, and his features were sharp rather than rugged. One arm was half bent, as though he had tried to ward off the crushing blow. The victim's wallet contained a card indicating that he was Edwin V. Foster, member in good standing of a fraternal organization. A thick roll of Straits currency showed that robbery had not been the motive. The trail from Kendall's body had led to the man from Pawang, his Malay assailants, and Edwin Foster. The Pawang's problem was now to link them together, and the Tiam Besar mine seemed the common bond. Across the hall from the master's bedroom was one whose occupant evidently had left in considerable haste. The silver mounting of a parasol was engraved, RMF. The monogram was repeated on a vanity case lying on the dressing table. Pawang Ali stepped to the living room, phoned a central station, then resumed his inspection of the house. There was a safe in Edwin Foster's study and a flat-topped desk on which was an extension phone. The inkwell weighted down a note, penned in a feminine hand. "Dad, I am dining at Tanjong Inn. Won't be back till late, Rita." The signature matched the one on the photo that stood at one corner of the desk. A lovely dark-eyed girl, Foster's daughter. The stars indicate strife over the property of a dead man. This woman must be the heiress. Bilahi, it is she who is the next link in the chain. Death might even now be stalking Rita Foster. The long arm of Iblis might at that moment be reaching for her. This was no time to wait for the police. Pawang Ali called his house in the native quarter. A dozen words in Chinese completed his terse orders. Then he headed for the entrance, picking up on the run the suitcase which the man from Pawang had abandoned. He cleared the veranda steps 3 at a bound and dashed down the lane toward town. He did not check his speed until he met the car that had come to meet him. The powerful car crunched to a halt as he whistled. Hop Wang was at the wheel. "Tanjong Katong," he commanded, bounding to the running board. "To the Tanjong Inn can do," said Hop Wang, whipping the car about. Pawang Ali stripped off his gaudy Malay garb and donned the formal evening dress from the suitcase which Hop Wang had brought. As they rounded the gasworks at Klang Road, he was patting into shape the voluminous turban which, with the decorations that now blazed from his shirt front, established him as an East Indian prince. Tanjong Inn admitted only Europeans, but a Raja would have ready entree. Hop Wang informed the management that Raja Sir Ram Singh Bahadur was incognito and desired a table screened from the public. Pawang Ali was privately ushered in through a side door of Tanjong Inn once. In position, he drew a dagger to cut a loophole through the screen that concealed him. He had no difficulty in picking Rita Foster from the crowd. Her eyes were darker than her hair, and she was lovelier than the photograph he had found in her father's study. She and her grey-haired, hatchet-faced companion were too deeply engrossed to dance, but it was certain that her interest in him was far from personal. He was Erskine Harper, president of the Sumatra Trading Corporation, long suspected of dealing in smuggled opium and munitions. A Chinese waiter appeared in response to Pawang Ali's summons. "Stay here," he commanded, "and let my man take your place, can do." Presently Hopwang was bustling about with a tray and solicitously hovering about the foster, heiress and Erskine Harper, seconding the Pawang's sharp scrutiny from the loophole. Harper, leaning across the table, emphasized his remarks with curt, jerky gestures. Rita Foster smiled wearily, shook her head. At last she arose from her chair. Harper shrugged and followed her. Pawang Ali tossed the waiter a bill. The Rajah had urgent affairs elsewhere. As he stepped to the side door, Hopwang overtook him and whispered, "Girl, get mad when Erskine say Kendall plenty fraud. Can't make Tation Besser mine pay expenses. My engineers can do. Why not sell?" Pawang Ali, seeing Harper assist Rita into a waiting car, stepped to his car to follow and learn more about the trouble making Tian bizarre, but a hired machine, breaking to a crunching halt, changed everyone's plans for the evening. A man in grey tweeds leaped from the wheel. He headed toward the entrance of the Tanjong Inn, but hearing Harper's chauffeur step on the starter, he glanced to his left, checked his stride, and turned toward the departing guests. It was the man from Pahang. His craggy face was crisscrossed with adhesive tape, and both hands were bandaged, but Rita and her companion recognized him. Harper's expression changed thrice in an instant: incredulity, apprehension, and then grim resolution. "Oh, good heavens, Dan, whatever happened to you?" exclaimed the girl. He ignored Rita's question and confronted Harper. "You damn dirty skunk! The Tian Besa won't pay. Certainly it won't, with the superintendent taking your pay and Foster's too. It's rotten with gold." A fresh load you knew about and hoped Rita's father wouldn't hear of until the lease was forfeited. Rita's dark eyes narrowed and her lovely face hardened as her glance shifted to Harper. "I thought something was wrong," she said in a low, tense voice. "I think Dan described you accurately enough." "Slade," barked Harper, advancing a pace toward the man from Pahang. "You are a Dan troublemaker." "I'll run you out of Malay, one owl." The rest was unspoken. Harper recoiled, but he was not quick enough. Slade's bandaged fist darted out. The impact was muffled, but Harper landed in a heap. "Dan, what in the world?" The girl caught his arm. "Do you mean? Can you prove? Does Dad know?" As Harper picked himself up, Slade exploded. "You dirty rat! You didn't figure I'd dodge that gang of cutthroats you sent to waylay me before I could show Foster some samples of the new load?" "What did Dad say, Dan?" interposed Rita. Pawang Ali, resplendent and glittering, drew a pace nearer. Here was strife about a dead man's property. "What did he say?" she asked again. "Not a word, Rita." Then he blurted out, "I found him dead." A scarcely perceptible catch of her breath, a moment of pallor and wide-eyed query. Then she echoed, "Dead? Murdered?" "And I came within an ace of being cut to pieces myself. So I came out here. I saw your note. I didn't want you to return and find him that way, without any warning. So you finally evened up the old score," accused Harper. "Where are those samples of rich ore?" Slade's sun-tanned face became sallow. Rita's expression changed at the mention of an old score. Now before he could answer, there was a voice from the left. "Daniel Slade, in the name of the king, I arrest you for the murder of Edwin Foster." In the tensity of the moment, Inspector Kemp's arrival had not been noted. Pawang Ali was the first to speak. Inspector Sahib, he interposed, catching Kemp's hand before he could tap Slade on the shoulder. There is more to this than shows on the surface. Kemp, however, shook his head. The Sais and number 1 boy came tearing into headquarters saying Slade killed Foster and fought them off when they tried to stop him. An accomplice of Slade's blocked them and killed 3 other servants and Malay Pengamok with yellow skull cap and a long kriss. Better study the stars some more. Pawang Ali. The ore samples that Slade brought from Pahang have a bearing on this Sahib, countered the Pawang. Slade eyed his advocate sharply and turned to the inspector. They were in a small suitcase. I dropped it near the compound gate. That crew of assassins ganged up on me to be sure I'd not tell Foster about the rich Taishan Besser load. I have them, asserted Pawang Ali. Who the devil are you? Demanded Harper. The Pawang shrugged, made a deprecatory gesture, and blandly answered, Just one of the Inspector Sahib's native friends. You may have all samples, scoffed Harper, but you have only Slade's word as to their origin. They were bait to give Foster false hopes, so he'd reject my offer and hang on until the lease is forfeited. Then the people Slade's working for will have their chance at the Taishan Besar. It's very simple. You will pardon me, apologized to Pahang for intruding my ignorance. But why this competition for a mine so lean that the operator is about to forfeit his lease, and why approach Miss Foster instead of her father? The last query contained a trap, but Harper's answer was ready. Because her father and I did not have the utmost esteem for each other, I hoped to persuade her to use her influence with him. My engineers could make the Taishan Besar pay. We have a new process for working lean ores. And by buying the lease, we would have 12 months in which to get into operation. Whereas Dr. Kendall, even if his method were practical, would not be able to keep the present owners of the Taishan Besar from forfeiting their leasehold, Inspector. There is more to this than the face of it, interposed the Pawang. Kemp, however, shook his head. His hand descended and he repeated the formula of arrest. Then he said to Pawang Ali, Eyewitnesses and Foster's servants are at headquarters awaiting his daughter's identification. There is really nothing else to be done, except clear up the death of Dr. Kendall. 4 Rita Foster and Erskine Harbour accompanied Inspector Kemp and his prisoner to headquarters. Pawang Ali followed. Once in his office, the inspector again warned the prisoner that whatever he said might be used against him. You could use some of it in my favor, retorted the American. I am representing the minority stockholders of the Taishan Besar Company. They are convinced that something is wrong with the management of the mine. As you may know, Dr. Clarence Kendall was at the same time sent from the States to introduce a new process of handling the so-called low-grade ore. A while before his arrival, I left Negri Sembilan and went to Pahang to make some undercover investigation. Carlyle Morton, the new superintendent of the Taishan Besar, was... New? Queried the Pawang. His voice was soft, but his eyes narrowed. Yes. The former super died of acute indigestion, which is easy enough to arrange, and Morton is working hand in hand with Erskine Harper. When I finally did get into the mine, I found a vein of rich ore and took specimens to show to Foster before I reported to the minority stockholders. Unusual solicitude on your part, wasn't it? Kemp cut in. Particularly since Foster dismissed you from a position in the States, giving him a break would not hurt the interests of other investors and might help me, retorted the man from Pahang. Anyone can see with half an eye that Carlyle Morton had plenty motive to waylay me. I'll send for Morton, countered Kemp, though it's far from certain you were waylaid. 3 of Foster's servants dead. And you and your Malay accomplice getting clear is Sahib Inspector. The Pawang cut in. I am the Malay accomplice. I hardly thought it worth mentioning. Then, grimacing wryly, he said to Slade, But what was the idea of fairly knocking me out of the ring? "Good heavens, was that you?" demanded Slade. I was groggy from a clip across the head. I played possum till I could pull myself together. I didn't really know anyone was on my side, so I figured, "Say, who the devil are you anyway?" "Only an Arab who has prospered under the noble British government," the Pawang answered, cutting short Slade's apologies. "And sometimes the police allow me to take a hand in minor affairs." Then, turning to Kemp, Pawang Ali salaamed and said, "With your permission, Sahib Inspector, I will leave you and Mr. Harper to confer." He did not wait to witness Rita Foster's identification of the servants who had tried to prevent Slade's escape. The Pawang was more interested in the astrological aspects of the case. He was far from convinced of Slade's guilt, but this was no time to try to upset the inspector's case. The Kendall affair, so closely linked to the death of Foster, would best await further developments. The Pawang, guided more by intuition than by tangible clues or logic, as the Occidental mind understands the word, sensed that the two major threads of murder were converging to a single focus of deadly menace. "Haste is of Satan," he said to himself as he took his place at the teak desk in his study, "and wisdom is with Allah. Neither should green fruit be plucked," all of which would have bewildered the inspector. Hence the Pawang's discreet retirement. But when, shortly before sunrise, he at last set aside his astrological tables and assembled the bits of gossip blank-faced Chinese and hard-bit-taken Malays had brought him from time to time during the night, Pawang Ali smiled like a well-fed tiger and spent half an hour religiously honing the blade of a kris that was already razor-sharp. Then he laid out a small silken rug, faced toward Mecca, and made his customary 4 rak'ah prayer. The Pawang spent the following day prowling about the Foster bungalow. He had in the meanwhile learned that the natives who had accused Slade of killing Foster were indeed bona fide servants. Nevertheless, a query loomed large in his mind as he listened to Rita's remarks. Slade had quarreled with her father several years ago and, as a result, had been dismissed from his position in a mine in the States. "But I asked Dan to follow us to Malaya," she concluded, thinking he and Dad might at last be reconciled, and he'd get a position in the Tian Besar. And then... She shook her head, and her dark eyes became somber. "You may yet go on with your plans." The Pawang smiled when grief is no longer so intense. And then he drove to police headquarters for news of Carlisle, Morton, and a look at the report submitted by the assistant warden of mines concerning the Tian Besar and its allegedly rich lode. There was a report. Inspector Kemp had just received it. "Look at this," he stormed, thrusting a telegram before the Pawang's eyes. Illegally stored explosives had half demolished the shafts and tunnels, killing a dozen or more miners. The explosion had originated in the drift, in which Slade claimed the rich lode cropped out. Popes would elapse before the debris could be cleared and the truth revealed. "But what of the new superintendent?" Pawang Ali asked. "That's the worst of it," grumbled Kemp. "He's either buried in the wreckage, or else he's taken to his heels to avoid charges of criminal negligence in handling explosives. It'll be easy for Slade to accuse him of conspiracy with Harper, but with direct and circumstantial evidence against him, our foxy American won't get very far." "Give me a little more time, Sahib Inspector," requested the Pawang. "In due course I will show that Slade is guiltless, inshallah." "Due course? Hell, do it now," challenged Kemp. "If you know anything, it's your duty to reveal it at once. Haste is of Satan. If I were a wizard, as my enemies call me, I could oblige you. As it is, I am forced to let the claw of Iblis ensnare himself, which he will presently do. Therefore be pleased to bring Erskine, Harper, and the man from Pahang to my house. Let Assistant Inspector Bradley come as a witness, also the girl. I'll do it, Kemp agreed, but no tricks, and you better prove your point. Not I, but the Masters of Destiny, corrected the Pawang. That night, 6 blank-faced Chinese coolies stood 3 and 3 at the door jamb of Pawang Ali's country estate, a few miles north of Singapore municipality. The Pawang, resplendent in a silken kaftan and white turban, was in the courtyard to receive his midnight callers. Kemp was there, grim and skeptical. Assistant Inspector Bradley had charge of Slade, whose face seemed to reflect the iron on his wrists. Rita Foster's dark eyes flashed a somber glance at Erskine as she edged toward the man from Pawang. Ali ushered them into a room that was utterly bare and ablaze with an eye-torturing blue-white incandescence that came from cunningly concealed cornice lamps. Not a hanging, not a piece of furniture, relieved the stark emptiness of tiled blankness, broken only by a single door and the single window opening out into the blackness of Malayan night. Pawang Ali gestured. The lights winked out. Simultaneously, the abysmal blackness was populated with silent presences, and before an exclamation could be voiced, the 5 callers were locked in the iron grasp of the invisible panther-silent henchman who had invaded the darkness. Silken cords were whisked by deft hands about the wrists and ankles of the quintet. "Of all the infernal insolence," sputtered Kemp, the first to find his tongue. "Peace upon you, brethren," intoned the Pawang's solemn voice. "Your lives are on my head. Neither I nor anyone serving me shall harm you." The surprise capture was completed with scarcely a struggle, and in another moment the merciless glare again assailed their eyes. "You might explain this idiocy," growled Kemp. Bradley echoed the demand. Harper was disdainfully calm. Rita eyed the Pawang, caught his reassuring nod, and shot a sidelong glance at Slade. "I am deeply grieved at the necessity that compels this move," apologized the Pawang, "but it is for your own good." He clapped his hands. 5 coolies filed in from the vestibule. Each carried a sturdy chair which he placed on the exact spot the master designated. That done, they seated the prisoners at their appointed places. Rita, the inspector, and his assistant were in a corner to the right of the arched window that pierced the eastern wall. Slade and Harper remained near the center of the room. The investigator then took a piece of chalk and on the tiles marked 2 circles in which he inscribed astrological symbols. "You who have accused each other of fraud and crime and conspiracy will each sit in the circle of his destiny," explained the Pawang, "and I shall call for justice. Then everything will be clear." His placid face had become as solemn as a brooding doom, but the peculiar glow in his faintly slanted eyes made him as sinister as the hidden menace he proposed to unveil. "Get it over," snapped Harper. "Inspector, I am amazed at your allowing this foolishness." Pawang Ali spoke a few words in Cantonese. The coolies bound Harper and Slade to their chairs and lifted them to the center of their cabalistical circles so that they faced the single window that opened into the outer blackness. The inspector was now perplexed rather than wrathful. He had long since abandoned his attempts to fathom the cryptic methods of his unofficial ally. He watched the Pawang face the 2 men who sat in their circles. The Arab's eyes had become fierce points of black fire. He gestured and murmured in a guttural language. Slade and Harper became rigid and their eyes glazed, staring sightlessly. A minute passed, the longest minute in the inspector's life. He began to feel the backlash of the psychic blast that was centering on the men in the occult circles. Both were now in a hypnotic trance. "Speak, Pawang," Ali at last commanded. He now blocked Kemp's view of Slade and Harper, but the inspector recognized the answering voice, despite its mechanical inflection and colorlessness. "This web of murder is spreading too far," said Harper. "I am afraid, but I dare not tell the truth. Who dynamited the Tian Besar mine?" Pawang Ali's question was followed by a strangled gurgling and a gasp. Then there was an answer. Harper's voice was strained and trembling. "The mine was blown up by my order to prevent the proof of Slade's story." Inspector Kemp muttered an oath. Pawang Ali turned and whispered, "Inspector Kemp, this man is hypnotized. But I will have to batter his secret out of him with psychic torture just as sure as though I applied the thumbscrew or rack. Look at his face. See the reflection of the torments he thinks are being inflicted on him, and listen carefully to what he says." Harper's eyes stared sightlessly toward the window that opened into the outer blackness. His body jerked and twitched. He was dripping with sweat, and his face was wrenched with agony. He was beginning to groan and mutter inarticulately. "Good Lord, man!" the inspector cried. "What are you doing to him? Damn it, that's diabolical. Stop it, or I deplore this, Kemp Sahib, but there is no other way. This man serves an oriental master, and, through the servant, I am striking at the claw of Iblis, the father of evil." He salaamed and turned his back toward the inspector. Harper's muttering became a low, half-human wailing, the outcry of a dumb beast in the uttermost agony. But at Pawang Ali's gesture the sound ceased, and Inspector Kemp exhaled a long, quivering sigh, a moment of brooding silence. The inquisitor blocked the view, so that Inspector Kemp could not see the victim's face, but Kemp heard the Pawang's low, venomous murmuring. That sweltering room had become a hell of blue-white light. Kemp's flesh crawled in sympathy with the futile writhings of that which quivered and moaned just beyond Pawang Ali. And then Harper began to laugh, a wild laugh. "Speak!" commanded Pawang Ali. His voice rang like a cavalry bugle. The laughter ceased. There was only hoarse, labored breathing and the inspector's cursing in a low, endless monotone. Torture by remote control was worse than any physical barbarity he had witnessed silence. The Pawang gestured as though summoning invisible forces to aid him in renewing the psychic torture. The sturdy chair creaked from Harper's sudden muscular contraction. "For heaven's sake, don't!" he shrieked. "I'll tell, stop!" Harper choked, tried to pronounce her name, but could not quite shape the syllables. "Try again," Pawang Ali suggested. Another attempt, almost a revelation, and then a rifle crackled. A bluish-black spot blossomed on Harper's sweat-beaded forehead. The wall behind him bore a gruesome spattering of red. Harper's revelation was blocked by the bullet of an unseen marksman. Pawang Ali turned toward the white-faced inspector. "The claw of Iblis has killed the servant who would have betrayed him." "You damned fool," stormed Kemp. "Why did you place him in front of that window? You might have known. And now we'll get nothing." "Inspector Sahib," said the Pawang, "the sharpshooter who fired that shot could reach Harper from one and only one position. Someone is even now following him back to his master. We have gained contact with the claw of Iblis. It is what I wanted. But why, you grinning idiot? Now, you can't question Harper, and we could have proved nothing. Please pardon my deception, Sahib, but it was necessary." During the much-regretted unceremonious reception, Slade and Harper both received an injection of a hypnotic drug. Hence my seeming quickness of control. Harper's groans were effective, but he did not actually speak. I spoke with his voice, blocking your view so that you could not see that his lips did not move. But the sniper, who could see only Harper's head and shoulders, concluded that my Chinese servants were applying tortures. So he fired, from rumors spread in the marketplace, though wisdom is with Allah. The Corps thought that I had a trick to make Harper talk, not knowing that the noble British government prohibits torture. And in the, confession by proxy, I said only what I myself suspected. The claw confirmed it. Do you mean to say that you deliberately sacrificed a man's life to test the truth of your suspicions? Pawang Ali smiled, and for a moment he seemed more sinister than the claw of Iblis. Then he said, in a regretful, almost melancholy voice, "It was his own evil, and not I, that struck him. Mr. Slade will recover in a moment. Inspector Sahib, while my servants release you and your companions in bondage, I once more apologize for my unceremonious reception." Slade soon responded to the ministrations of the Pawang. Well, it does seem that someone feared Harper's impending revelations," conceded Kemp after a few minutes of pondering. "But how about Slade? You just complicated things, not cleared them." The American blinked and gazed perplexedly about him. But before he could accept the challenge, the Pawang intervened. Upon his arrival in Pahang, he called a gari and in a loud voice announced his destination, which he would not have done if he had had murder in his heartland. But the testimony of 3 of the servants, countered the inspector. They gave you an accurate description of the man from Pahang. None. One contradicted the others in a single detail. Such perfection is unheard of, particularly among men who have just fled from a mortal battle. And finally, Slade gets the remainder of his luggage, goes to a hotel to put on fresh clothing, and sets out for Tanjong Katong to find Miss Foster making every move so openly you were able to follow on his heels. Kemp conceded those points, but he persisted. "First we'll have to investigate those servants and settle with." "That is only fair, Sahib," admitted the Pawang, smiling cryptically. He salaamed to his callers and added, "Thank you for your company, and with your permission I shall return to my studies." Why, less than an hour after the departure of Pawang Ali's callers, Sang Ah Fong, his Chinese assistant, entered the study. Prior born. "I followed the slayer of that foreign devil to a Malay kampong. I overheard talk of a masked lord who is behind a guarded door. To see him, a token must be offered. A password. No, honorable master, a silver rupee." The man I followed came out presently. He was a Gurkha. The Chinaman produced a silver coin and a broad-bladed kukri. Pawang Ali examined the coin and saw that 2 of the 4 date numerals had been cut away, leaving only a 1 and a 9. "This Gurkha will miss his token," objected the Pawang. "No, exalted lord, he will miss nothing." Pawang Ali had anticipated the answer, but not the head which the Chinaman unwrapped from a Malay sarong. "Why do you bring this, Sang Ah Fong?" "So that the prior-born may copy the face, and thus enter the presence of the masked lawyer." Followed Sang Ah Fong's unexpected lead, was a play as good as it was perilous. "Thou hast done well, little brother," Pawang Ali acknowledged. "If by this time the man from Pahang be released from jail, see that neither he nor the white girl makes any move without your knowledge." The Chinaman bowed and left the room. Sang Ah Fong was over-optimistic in expecting his master to impersonate a man whose very name he did not know. Pawang Ali for a long time sat frowning. At last he set the head on a table in a mirrored alcove, removed his turban, and began applying scarcely perceptible touches of makeup which would falsify the contour of his face. He plucked his brows, and with deft applications of gum distorted the eyelids to give the illusion of a mongoloid slant. He accentuated his cheekbones, squared off the chin, and gave his nostrils the semblance of an increased flare. Then he glanced at his own reflection in the mirror. His own personality had to a degree been submerged, but he did not yet duplicate that particular Gurkha whose bullet had caught Erskine Harper between the eyes. And then it came to him. Pawang Ali's sudden smile was a flash of ivory as he stepped into his wardrobe. In a few moments he emerged, arrayed in a costume appropriate to a wandering Gurkha. He thrust the broad-bladed kukri into his belt. Then, with the severed head under his arm, he entered a passageway which opened into an alley several blocks from the house. Presently, the Pawang stalked into a rendezvous of smugglers and part-time pirates who still evaded the law. A group of Chinese were playing main po predatory melees, lifted reddened eyes from their glasses of arak, and muttered as the synthetic Gurkha strode into the smoke-thickened air which dimmed the flickering kerosene lanterns to a murky glow. In a corner sat a burly Afghan who mumbled in his red beard and pulled noisily at a flask. Yet for all the semblance of loafering, Pawang Ali did not miss the sudden tension as he crossed the threshold. Though the place was public, the majority of the hangers-on must be henchmen of the masked lord. He glanced about as though seeking a familiar face. Ahead of him was a door, the only door that opened into rooms beyond. Beyond it must be the masked lord, the claw of Iblis. "Ho, thou Redbeard," he hailed, striding toward the Afghan. Then, in mangled Pashto, he continued, "I am looking for vengeance. That is a topic which fascinates Afghans from childhood to burial. I have come all the way from Kathmandu to see my brother," declared Pawang Ali. "I found him dead on the Kampong Baru road." "Your brother?" A dozen eyes speared him. Then someone demanded, "Who the devil is your brother anyway?" Which was one question the Pawang could not answer. Yet answer it he must, or the game was over. "And who are you?" asked the Afghan, narrowly eyeing him. That was as bad as the original question, but the Pawang, lacking words, replied with a gesture. He unwrapped the sarong and held the severed head by the hair so that all could see. And even in that nest of cutthroats, the gory exhibit made them forget their questions. They stared, open-mouthed. A mutter of amazement. Someone exclaimed, "Bim Sen Thapa, he left here less than an hour ago. Who's his enemy?" demanded the Pawang facing the speaker. "I, Matabar Singh Thapa, will carry this head until I have taken the head of the slayer." He fumbled in his sash and found the mutilated silver rupee. He laid it on the table, then drew forth a crumpled letter with a straight settlement stamp. The address was illegible, except for Kathmandu. It had ostensibly been written by a public scribe. Actually, postmarks and all, it had cost the Pawang a good 15 minutes of writing. "Read," he commanded. Blank looks. Scholars were no more plentiful in Singapore than in Kathmandu. "He spoke of buried gold," continued Pawang Ali. "But as soon as the scribe read me that line, I took it from him, lest he remember and follow me." "Someone slew my brother for the sake of treasure." A dozen hands clutched for the letter. "We know a scribe my uncle can read." "Aye, wallah, a certain Tatayan not." But the self-appointed Matabar Singh shook his head. "I do not trust these scribes nor sahibs. Is there no one here who can read?" As he spoke, he fingered the mutilated rupee. At his left, the muttered colloquy became a tense whispering. The speakers hardly thought that a simple mountaineer from Kathmandu would understand Chinese and mongrel Arabic. "Nay, by heaven, take not this lout to the great lord. We will slay him and keep his letter me. Better take him to the masked lord," decided the Afghan dominating the huddle. "This great Tian," differently interposed the Gurkha, "perchance he can read." "Aye, voila," affirmed Redbeard, his long arm sweeping aside the other advisers. I, Ibrahim Khan, will make it easy for vengeance. Come with me, Matabar Singh." Ibrahim gestured toward the door that opened to the rear. "Offer the sentry that coin, younger brother, and say 19. And after you have seen the masked lord, we too will dig up the treasure under his protection. Thy excellent brother, he was, even as a brother to me." The Afghan's grief was heart-moving, but it failed to mask the none too clever legerdemain, whereby the stout fellow slipped the letter from its cover and handed Pawang Ali the empty envelope. A Tamil received the token and password. He gestured down a narrow passageway and called, 19, Bimsen Tapa. Yes, by Allah, 19, Bimsen Tapa, echoed a voice in guttural Arabic as the call was passed along. In the darkness, the Tamil's error was not surprising. And in a moment, an Arab in a grimy jellab was escorting him into a room, the front of which was a simmering blaze of light. In an alcove just beyond the edge of the glow, half buried in shadows, sat a man in European dress. His face was masked, but his hands were visible. Lean, muscular and bronzed, one stroke of the heavy kukri, and then a report, "Killed while resisting arrest." But the Pawang did not know whether this man was the claw of Iblis or merely an assistant. He must first trick him into some expression of identity. "I seek vengeance, Tian," began Pawang Ali, mangling his Malay to accord with his role. "You couldn't have come to a better place," said an ironic voice from behind the mask. "So you are Bimsen Thapa's brother, eh?" The mask muffled the voice, so that he could not compare it with the one that had mocked Inspector Kemp over the radio, and the use of Malay instead of English was a further handicap. The situation was too precious to waste on small game. "Verily, Tian, I am the brother of that man who was treacherously slain." A moment of silence. Pawang Ali felt as well as saw the stare that searched his face. Something had gone wrong. There was a basic flaw in his imposture. The room was becoming a vortex of menace. Silent mockery radiated from behind that black mask. Yet the languid ease of the lean brown fingers told him that the masked lord could not know that Pawang Ali stood before him. "It is very odd, Matabar Singh," said that ironic voice, "that your brother returned from an errand that should have ended in his capture or death. In following the sniper Pang, Ali had walked into a trap. I have been waiting for someone to follow Bimsen." As he spoke, the masked lord's hand darted toward the arch of the alcove, but Pawang Ali was in motion before the enemy. His lithe body moved with the eye-deceiving swiftness of a cobra. He lunged, drawing his kukri. The broad blade licked out, a shearing blaze of steel, but rebounded as from an anvil. The Pawang's advance was checked in mid-lunge. He was hurled back as though he had plunged headlong against a stone wall. The masked lord's fingers reached the push-button at the jamb of the arch. The treacherous light had concealed a barrier. Shatterproof glass protected the master of the show from knife or bullet. A low, mocking laugh, the rustle of silken hangings, the faint shuffle of bare feet, and the glint of steel from the shadows at the left. Retreat was cut off. The Pawang, recovering from the paralyzing impact, regained his feet and retrieved his kukri, ready to cut his way to the door. All in an instant. Then he saw that his fighting instinct had functioned faster than his senses. Those vague, tigerish figures were only his own reflection in a bank of mirrors. The deception lasted no more than a split second, yet the delay was disastrous. A bolt slipped into place. The exit was barred. There was an ominous sighing and whistling. Sweetish, pungent fumes were thickening the air. His head was already reeling, and his legs seemed to be flexible as ribbons. He scarcely felt the impact of his blade against the solid teak door. He held his breath, and repeated the assault. But he had already inhaled too much of the narcotic gas. Grey mists swirled in ever-thickening eddies, obscuring the relentless blaze of the overhead light. The masked lord was speaking from beyond the protecting screen. "You most stupid of flat-nosed fools, did you really think this was Bimsen's brother? Tie him up. He'll talk. He'll tell us all about." About what? The final words eluded the Pawang, but lingering shreds of his blotted wits assured him that the question would be repeated in fire and steel. 6. Rita Foster, in her father's limousine, followed the inspector from Pawang Ali's country residence to police headquarters. When, after a long wait, she was at last admitted to the inspector's office, she was for a moment quite beyond words. Slade was not under guard, and as he flung aside his half-smoked, hopelessly shredded cigar, he leaped to his feet, caught her in his arms, and said, "You tell her, Inspector." "I am busy, as you can easily see," Kemp presently broke in to explain. "I kept you waiting, Miss Foster, until I could be certain of the significance of the death of your 3 servants during our seance at Pawang Ali's house." "Death?" "Yes, the surgeon has just informed me that they had been poisoned by the delicacies that some alleged relatives had brought them to supplement jail rations. In view of Pawang Ali's startling revelations, this poisoning is a move to protect the claw of Iblis." That reminded Rita of the long reach of the master criminal. "Then Dan's next," she exclaimed. "Mr. Kemp, maybe you'd better keep him here until Pawang Ali has caught the claw. I wouldn't be a bit more worried about Mr. Slade." He laughed. Now that his story is common property, there would be no reason for silencing him. "My friend the Pawang is the one who is in real danger. The devil, you say?" flared Slade. "If there is any danger, I am teaming up with him after the way he went to bat for." Kemp shook his head. "Commendable, but most unnecessary, and the Pawang's methods are so, unorthodox. I might say that I prefer to let him, work things out himself, if you get what I mean." "I get plenty," chuckled Slade. "But what do you mean?" "The Pawang, too, native criminals gave him that title," explained Kemp. "It means wizard or something of the sort, which of course is perfect rot. His real name is Sheikh El-Sayed Nureddin Ali bin Ayyub El-Saudi El-Idrisi, and he's a Mohammedan saint, half Arab, and the nephew of a former Malay Raja." "Some title, eh? Holy smoke!" marveled Slade. He's certainly unassuming about it, and after acknowledging Kemp's expressions of regret at his unfortunate detention, Slade accompanied Rita to her car. "Neither of them," observed the Chinaman who lurked in the shadows, watching and listening. "Dan, come out and help me pack up. I am moving to a hotel. I was so worried about you last night I didn't notice it, but now that it's over, the thought of staying in that house gives me shivers." Slade headed the car up South Bridge Street. He was quite unaware of the dark form that clung to the spare tire rack. Once or twice he eyed the lovely girl at his side, but his thoughts kept him grim and inarticulate. At last he said, "Listen, darling, the more I think of this mess, the more certain I am that by putting 2 and 2 together, we can get to the bottom of things. Dr. Kendall was killed to keep him from getting into the Tian Bazaar. To make a preliminary survey for his process of smelting, he'd have tumbled to the rich lode right away. Harper was some big crook's yes man. And by going through your father's files, we could turn up some others of the ring, which would give the police something to work on." Slade's approach was fresh, since the police investigation had, until an hour ago, been based on the assumption that he was the criminal instead of assisting Rita with her packing. He explained his views. Together they went through Foster's files, listing every business associate. Then they added the names of acquaintances, club members, and casual callers. Dan, there simply can't be a criminal in the whole catalogue. Who would have suspected Harper? Countered Slade. Now, who on this list was connected with him? We need more than that, Dan, said Rita, smiling wearily. He would have to be someone who could give warning of your leaving Pawang, so you'd be taken care of when you got to Singapore. That's the kink. Let's call the inspector. He can check up on every white man in the Pawang district. There aren't over 500. He stepped to the telephone and outlined his plan. Not half bad, Slade, approved Kemp. Fact is, I was considering something of the sort when you called. Suppose you bring me your list and all of Mr. Foster's files. In the meantime, I'll raid Harper's office on Battery Road. Check. Slade slammed the receiver and reached for his hat. Pack up your toothbrush. Gorgeous. I'll clean up the desk and cabinets. Before Slade completed his task, Rita had packed a suitcase. As he emerged with the first filing drawer, she was backing the car into the drive. Open the door, he called. But he had scarcely set foot on the walk leading to the driveway when he yelled a warning. As Rita leaned from the wheel to fling open the rear door, a slant-eyed face appeared from the darkness beyond the car. A Chinaman leapt to the running board, jerked the door open, and throttled her cry of alarm. Simultaneously, there was a stirring and a rustling on every side of Slade. Instead of dropping the filing drawer, his arms shot out, hurled it at a lurker who cropped up from the shrubbery between him and the car. The heavy missile caught the Malay full in the chest, sent him crashing backward. Teal gleamed, but the leader of the raid growled a guttural command, and a club crashed down on Slade's shoulders. He lunged toward the voice, his fist plowing home. The impact lifted the Malay and sent him rocketing to the hood of the car. But before Slade could follow up, he was overwhelmed by half a dozen natives. Despite the crashing, destructive punches he jabbed home, they bore him to the ground. He heard a yell, a curse, and a shrill scream from the car. Glass-spattered Slade, struggling to his knees, saw that Rita had snatched a wrench and sliced it across a swarthy face. "Sock 'em one!" roared Slade. He lunged forward like a wolf, breaking from a pack of hounds. In his hand he clutched a rock he had torn from the border of the walk. He hurled it as he charged. Another man, down jaw, shattered by the missile. Rita was free for the moment. "Grab the wheel and clear out!" roared Slade, plowing another yard through the pack. There was something odd about the attack. Despite the destruction he had spread, the enemy had discarded their krises. Clubs probed the confusion, battering and numbing him, driving him to his knees, paralyzing him as he fought odds that his weight could not quite overcome. Rita, instead of taking advantage of her momentary respite, had seized a jack-handle, one vicious, slashing blow. "Clear out!" repeated Slade, as he again sank to the walk, still slugging and kicking. "Beat it! I'll hold 'em!" They were holding him, but Slade could not see it that way. His head was a battered confusion, and red spots danced before his eyes, but his lacerated fists pounded like hammers. A final, nerve-tearing heave lifted him up through the squirming heap. "Get out!" he roared. "Get those papers to the police. That's what they want." Then Rita understood. The jack-handle crashed down on a red skullcap, but as she retreated to the car, Slade was submerged, and the wave of Chinese and Malay thugs swept forward. Strong hands snatched the weapon from her hands. A club laid Slade flat at her feet. "Dump them into my car," commanded a voice in English. Before Rita could see the speaker, her head was enveloped by a greasy sarong, but she caught a fleeting glimpse of dark figures swarming into the house. 7, when Pawang Ali recovered from the narcotic gas that had blotted out his wits, he was in a small cell with masonry walls and an iron-barred door. The air was dense, and moisture oozed from the stones. He was underground. Presently, he heard a scuffling in the corridor, and a wrathful voice cursing in Pashto. A squad of Chinese halted at the door of the cell. Their captor was Ibrahim, the red-bearded Afghan. He had been beaten until he was beyond anything but threats of vengeance. The jailer opened the Pawang cell. The guards flung the Afghan headlong into a corner. "Hi, the dog! The devil!" exclaimed Pawang Ali. "So he buries us both while he digs up the treasure. Treasure!" The Afghan spat the word, wiped the blood from his lips. "He had me flogged for admitting you, Pawang Ali's spy. He will skin you alive and crucify you. O eater of carrion, otherwise I would kill you with my empty hands." The welts that seamed Ibrahim's back and face were genuine, yet the Pawang suspected a snare. "We will be crucified together, red beard," mocked Pawang Ali. "I spoke of certain buried loot before the masked lord tripped me up with his exceeding cunning. He is convinced that the letter you stole from me was a bribe to let me seek him with a knife." Ibrahim's face lengthened for a moment, but his next words were no surprise. "Billah, thou art right, Matabar Singh. Instead of quarreling, let us use our wits and both escape." Ibrahim explained his strategy. It was simple, eminently practicable, and at once put into effect. A blow, a curse, and a shuffling of feet opened the show. Then grunts and gasps, and the clatter of the iron grill as Pawang Ali crashed against it, hurled bodily by the burly Afghan. From the left came the jailer's voice, a cackling of profane abuse. The trick was working. Their wrathful growls and grunts did not subside, but the sound of strife did not mask the silvery tinkle of a handful of coins that dropped to the floor. The Chinese jailer came dashing down the corridor. A straight dollar rolled out to meet him. Ibrahim and Matabar Singh continued their vigorous battle. A greasy kerchief, knotted about a handful of coins, lodged between the bars as the combatants again crashed against the grill. The jailer swooped like a falcon. His talons closed about the parcel of silver. Ibrahim's heavy hands darted through the bars, gripped him by the throat, and jammed the Chinaman's head against the grill. In an instant, the wiry Gurkha had the jailer's keys. 3 quick trials sufficed to open the door. The Afghan flung the jailer into the cell, but before Pawang Ali could batter his brains out against the masonry, his companion caught his arm. "Nay, Matabar Singh, do not kill while hung for a yellow ape. He is a good fellow and somewhat a friend of mine. I will tie and gag him." They trussed the jailer and locked him in the cell. Oddly enough, he was not armed. Pawang Ali was now certain that Ibrahim had faked a break in order to accompany the dull-witted Gurkha back to his master. But as they rounded the corner, he saw that the trick was far from transparent. None of the keys fitted the lock that blocked their escape. The Afghan cursed in a low, wrathful voice. At last he muttered, "By Allah, it is simple. Follow me, O Matabar Singh, and thy master will reward me richly. By Allah, he will." The masquerader solemnly swore. They retraced their steps to the jailer's room at the other end of the corridor. In addition to the door through which they had entered, was another that opened into a cross passage, but Ibrahim's plan called for a halt. "It is useless to advance," he whispered. "It is guarded. But look, here is a telephone. Call Pawang Ali, thy master, Wallah. He will raid this place and slay every man in it, as is his custom." That would lead the Pawang's men into a fatal trap. Matabar Singh had been spared in order to snare Pawang Ali. There was no way of warning his men. Some enemy would be listening in on an extension to hear how the Gurkha's appeal was received. Yet the message had to go through. "Excellent," applauded Matabar Singh. "But where are we? I must give Pawang Ali the address." Ibrahim gave him explicit instructions. The Gurkha lifted the receiver and poured his troubles into the wire. What the Afghan failed to note was that Matabar Singh had kept the hoop down and had talked to a dead line. As Pawang Ali replaced the receiver, Ibrahim's ponderous bulk flashed forward, caught him from the rear, and sent him crashing into a corner. His powerful hands closed about the Pawang's throat. "Father of a pig," growled the Afghan, "meet your master in hell." The crushing impact and the throttling grip left the Pawang limp and stunned. But before blackness entirely engulfed him, wrath lashed his lagging muscles into action. He wrenched clear of those deadly hands that would, in another moment, tear him limb from limb. The Afghan whirled to pin him down again. The Pawang's leg shot out, caught Ibrahim in the stomach, sent him snapping backward. During that scant sliver of time, Pawang caught the end of his unwound turban. The Afghan recovered and closed in to tear the stupid Gurkha apart. Ibrahim, failing to allow for his adversary's agility, missed by a hair. He plunged past his quarry. The turban cloth whipped about his neck. The constricting loop closed like a python's coil. What followed was a blur of deadly motion. The Afghan's neck was broken as the slayer and the slain crashed into a corner. Pawang Ali, however, was living on borrowed time. His failure to use the telephone would make the claw of Iblis wonder what was delaying Ibrahim's strategy. Nor was there any use in trying to get a message through to the police. The directions the Afghan had given him would lead to an ambush far from the den of Iblis. One resource remained. The shortwave radio, which had been used to announce the death of Dr. Kendall. He slicked through the gloom of the passage that led from the jailer's rooms, but his search was interrupted by a woman's outcry and a masculine voice that rumbled searing oaths. Then he heard the jangle of metal, a wheezing and a squeaking. He turned to his left. At the end of the passageway was a room that no longer needed its single drop light. The glare of the brazier of charcoal drowned that sickly glow. Sparks showered as a kneeling Malay pumped wheezing bellows. Two others stood by, awaiting orders from a masked man. Rita, Foster, and Slade were shackled to the wall. The latter was stripped to the waist, and his bare feet were drawn toward the ceiling by cords so that he rested on his shoulders. "Miss Foster, now that you know I am the claw of Iblis," said the masked man, "you may listen to reason. Your late father's stubborn refusal to sell out to Erskine Harper caused me considerable annoyance. I removed your father's stock certificates from his safe. All you have to do is endorse them to me." "You can't get away with $1 million extortion," growled Slade. "Even if Rita did transfer the stock, how do you expect to keep it?" "The disappearance of the Foster heiress and the transfer of the controlling interest in the mine would cause disastrous comment," explained the claw of Iblis. "So she will sign an irrevocable power of attorney and then be released. But you, Mr. Slade, will stay here as a hostage to ensure her discretion until the estate is settled and the transfer recorded. Simple, isn't it?" Once the stock of the Tian Besar was transferred, it could be put on the market and bought back again through a score of camouflaged accounts. And Slade's burial place would remain a secret. "Sign," barked Slade as the claw offered Rita a pen. The claw shrugged and murmured a few words to the Malays. Pawang Ali, lurking in the shadows, appraised the odds. The Malays bristled with krises, too much for empty hands, and though Slade's iron stubbornness might carry him far, the girl would in the end surrender to put an end to his torment. "Hang on, I can take it," growled Slade as the glowing iron drew smoke from his bare chest. "Once you sign, we're through." "Oh, good Lord, Dan, we're through anyway." "Hang on," he groaned. The clank of his fetters muffled his words. The torturers were giving him free play of his chains so that he would wear himself out in a futile struggle to evade the searing brands of gleaming metal. They knew better than to apply the utmost torment. The shock would blot out his senses, and that Rita was spared the hot iron hinted at what would be her ultimate end. Pawang Ali gathered himself for an empty-handed charge. Slade was his protégé. He could not now abandon him. Rita was sick with horror and could not hold out much longer. It was insane, but the honor of an Arab demanded it. And then it came to him. There was one play left. As the hot iron again tainted the air with the reek of scorching flesh, the Pawang wheeled and dashed swiftly back to the corridor from which he had started. He seized the keys of his cell, unlocked the door, and caught the jailer by the throat. Even if the fellow had not been gagged, that relentless grip would allow him not a gurgle. When the Pawang's fingers finally relaxed, he shouldered his throttled burden. The Cantonese are lightweights. This one would be a shield. He returned to the torture room with but a second to spare. Rita's nerve had cracked. She was reaching for a pen. The Malays had laid their tongs aside. The one with the bellows still squatted by the fire, fanning it to incandescence, so that the glare and the showers of sparks would quench any lingering stubbornness. A woman was signing away a fortune and 2 lives, and their eyes could not help but follow the gesture. The moment arrived. Holding the dead jailer before him, the Pawang bounded forward, 1, 2, 3 long leaps. The quartet sensed rather than heard his panther-like approach. There was a blur of steel as a kriss flashed from a sarong. A warning yell, the claw reached to his hip. A bullet chunked into the jailer. The Pawang hurled his human shield headlong into the cluster of Malays. The claw fired again, but the Pawang's swift advance carried him wide of the shot. A drawn kriss clanged to the floor as the human projectile broke the Malay's charge. Another pistol blasted Pawang Ali, felt the draft of the passing bullet, but before the weapon could be jammed against his body, he was in the midst of the tangle. His fingers closed on the haft of a kriss. The blade slashed upward, biting flesh, but the Pawang was submerged in the dogfight. Another thrust. The weapon was struck from his grasp. They had him pinned to the floor, and the claw was advancing, pistol ready. It seemed like a clean sweep for the arch-criminal. But as he came within arm's reach of the Pawang, there was a howl of agony, a stench of burning flesh and scorching cloth. A shower of white-hot coals rained over the struggling group. Pawang Ali, released by the fiery distraction, erupted from the mill of threshing limbs. As he snatched one of the torturer's implements, he saw what had happened in the struggle. A pair of tongs had been kicked toward the wall. Slade, by dint of straining, had seized the implement, reached for the brazier, and hurled the bed of white-hot coals at the enemy. All in a glance. The Pawang lashed out with the iron bar which had branded Slade. It smashed home through a yellow skullcap, parried the stroke of a kriss, swept savagely across a brown face. He shifted, ducked a hissing blade, and whirled to cut down the claw. The blow fell short of its mark, but struck the pistol from the enemy's hand. The survivors broke for cover. Pawang Ali, bounding forward, tripped and measured his length on the blood-splashed floor. The claw and his henchman wheeled, but from the passageway came the roar of voices and the pounding of feet. A file of Chinese and Malay ruffians came pouring into the room. The Pawang snatched a kriss from the floor, kicked the claw's abandoned pistol across the floor towards Slade, and shouted his challenge. "I am Pawang Ali, and I die slaying." As he spoke, he dashed aside his Gurkha turban. Despite his cunning, make-up, the expression of his features changed. They recognized the terror of the Malay coast and knew that he was about to run amok, slashing with inhuman fury until literally hacked limb from limb. The file fanned out. No one wanted to be the first to meet a Pengamot Pawang. Ali's eyes flashed toward the wall. Slade, straining against his fetters, was about to reach the half-empty pistol. "Shoot out the light!" roared the Pawang. Darkness would give him a chance to cut through while the enemy maimed each other in the confusion. His audacious challenge had won him a split second to give Slade the signals. He bounded forward, Chris hissing as its wavy blade whirled in a bloodthirsty moulinet. A pistol cracked at the left. Slade had fired, but the overhead globe still cast its murky light over the crescent of steel that was closing in on the Pawang. He charged straight for the center. Then, in mid-air, his body seemed to change direction, flashing sidewise. His incredible shift caught the right flank off guard. His whirling blade bored through like a snowplow. The survivors wheeled. Slade's pistol again crackled. The light winked out. A howl of fury drowned the Pawang's savage laugh as his blade lashed into the gloom. He was hacking his way to the door, but he did not attain his mark. Jets of flame spurted from the passageway and led right to the battlefield. Shouts. Tramping feet. Long white tongues of light probed the howling confusion. Bearded and turbaned Sikhs in khaki tunics swept everything before them as they clubbed and shot like grim automatons. In their midst was Inspector Kemp. At his side was Tsang Ah-Fong, unperturbed and beaming. Tsang Ah-Fong, who had been detailed to follow Slade. "Inspector Sahib," shouted Pawang Ali as he plunged into the confusion. "Where is the claw of Iblis? By Allah, if he escaped!" "Don't worry," growled a grim voice from the left wall. "Come over here with a light." As the Sikhs herded the survivors down the passageway, Inspector Kemp handed Slade the flashlight. He played the beam toward the doorway. A masked man lay huddled in a heap. Pawang Ali's kick in the ribs evoked not a sign of life. He jerked aside the mask, revealing a bronzed, predatory face with a hard mouth and a commanding beak of a nose. "Strike me blind," exclaimed the inspector. Mahmud, Abdullah, Datu Abdullah, the smuggler, the gunboat commander, reported killed in action off the coast of Akin last year. Pawang Ali shrugged and murmured. The Commander Sahib was in error when he failed to bring in Mahmud's head. And when crime broke out anew, I began to wonder as I recognized the familiar touch of Mahmud Ree. I couldn't resist the temptation to plug him first before I popped the light, apologized Slade. "Now, for hell's sweet sake, get a blacksmith. It'll soon be morning, and Rita and I have an awful lot of important business too." "It is written that haste is of Satan," interrupted the Pawang. End of The Claw of Iblis by E. Hoffmann Price.